Welcome everyone to the Teach Access Student Academy presented by Microsoft. I am Rolando Mendez, Director of Education at Teach Access, and we're here for the session Leveling Up, Making the Games Accessible. As a reminder, we're committed to making this event accessible. You can turn on the captions using the C button in your Zoom toolbar, or usually located in the bottom of your screen. There's American Sign Language interpretation, and will be highlighted for everyone or spotlighted for everyone. If you need help, you can send us a message via the chat to hosts and panelists, and we'll be happy to support you. A little bit about Teach Access. We are a nonprofit organization helping educators teach accessibility and disability inclusion, and we support students, such as many of yourselves, to acquire accessibility skills. We partner with industry to share real-world practices, and our goal is that everyone has some fundamental knowledge about accessibility, regardless of their discipline. And a good reminder is that all of our programs and resources are free for students and educators. There are multiple ways to engage during the session. You can participate in the chat when it's available during Q&A. You can ask questions using the Q&A functionality. You can take notes or don't take notes at all. Quiet listening also works and counts too. And as always, we have a long day ahead, so step away, stretch, or take breaks as you need. Finally, a thank you to our sponsors, Microsoft, Google, Salesforce, ADP, Meta, and Skyscanner. And with that, I'll introduce our two panelists, Arman Nobari and Jordan Kough. Arman is an award-winning designer, game developer, and the CEO and co-founder of Good Trouble, the accessibility intelligence company. After surviving cancer, Arman went to lead an UX incubator at YouTube and later co-created Able to Play, the world's first personalized way to discover accessible games. Now leading Good Trouble, his mission is to make accessibility universal in gaming. Jordan, on the other hand, is the executive director of the AbleGamers Foundation, where he leads efforts to expand accessibility and inclusion in gaming for people with disabilities. A longtime disability rights advocate, Jordan previously served as executive director of the Disability Rights Legal Center and the National Down Syndrome Congress, advancing policy, legal protections, and community empowerment. Outside of his professional work, Jordan is an avid gamer, hence, that's why he's here. He enjoys competitive play in Madden and League of Legends and has been a lifelong Pokemon fan since playing the original Pokemon Yellow. With that, we'll start our panel. So let's kick things off with introductions. We kind of like read the bio, but we want to know, who are you, what do you do, and how does accessibility play a role in the work you do with games?
Who's first, Arma?
Oh, go you take it away. You take it away. I got the first intro. You go first.
All right, excellent. Well, it's nice to meet everybody. My name's Jordan Kough, as Rolando just shared with you. I'm a longtime disability rights advocate, and I've done work in a lot of different levels of space. My role is the executive director at AbleGamers, and so I'm kind of in charge of all the work that we do overall. But AbleGamers really, mainly does our work in two spaces. One, we help gamers get access to games in the first place. And what does that mean? That means the ability to hold a controller, to play different games, to be able to interpret what is happening on the screen, whether they can see it, whether they can't see it, whether they can hear it, whether they can't hear it. We're trying to find the different access points for different players. So they will reach out to our adaptive gaming specialists. They'll say, this is my disability. This is the game I want to play. And we have two guys that have the best job in the world. It's to play all the games, to play with all the controllers. They know what everybody can do and the different ways to do it. We provide those equipment or that equipment to those players for free for their ability to access the game. So that's how we're helping on the ground players get access to the video gaming world. But the other side of that is that we have our APX training. And what that is a recognition of what we call the 22 main patterns to create accessibility in video games. And so we run a training for video game developers to be able to do that. So we'd encourage everybody to take a look at that. We have a scholarship program for that program as well. But the APX training has trained almost 1,100 game developers now across the world over the last 6 years. And so both of those play a big role in terms of the accessibility and the world of gaming overall. We're looking to build a community of gamers that have a safe place to play, have the ability to get access to games, and when they get there, the ability to play them.
Hey everybody, my name's Arman. First, before I jump into sharing anything about myself or Good Trouble, I just want to give a shout out to Jordan. I've spoken with Jordan and learned a lot about his work and the work he does, and it's just I think he understated how impactful his team is to just enabling folks to be able to really connect with this art form. So shout out to Jordan and thank you for being here as well, man. Hello, everyone. My name is Arman Nobari. I'm a cancer survivor turned game developer and studio founder. During my time going through chemotherapy, I briefly lost my vision. I lost my fine motor control. And what I really lost was the ability to engage with this art form, this culture that I took for granted before that experience. In the hospital, after I kind of recovered, I'd play games to keep my spirits up, and I would turn my laptop or my Game Boy Advance back in the day to my friends in the hospital to play games together, but different accessibility barriers prevented them from playing like I could. And I took that personally. So now, 15 odd years later, I'm the CEO and co-founder of a technology company called Good Trouble. And we're sort of the other half, the complement side to sort of what organizations like AbleGamers does. Good Trouble invents the necessary technology to push the envelope forward into what new forms of accessibility is actually possible at the cutting edge of technology and innovation. So we do that in a couple ways. Like Rolando said, we have a website called able2play.com. Anyone can go on there for free, make a profile. We match gamers to games based on accessibility. And we also help build new ways that developers can make more accessible games, pushing what the technology is capable of as well. So super excited to be here and to be a part of this. And thank you, Rolando, for all of your effort organizing this. This is such a meaningful event.
And thank you both for joining us on this interesting topic. I am sure that many of the students and faculty that we interact with are avid gamers and they enjoy gaming. And I think accessibility needs to be talked about more in gaming industry. So that leads me to our next question. And maybe we can start with you, Arman. What does accessibility look like in games for someone that just is hearing about this in gaming for the first time?
Yeah, I'll share a few types of examples outside of games, and I'll use that to contextualize sort of where I think we're at with games. So, regardless of maybe your familiarity with the depth and craft of accessibility as like an industry, if you've walked up and down streets and there's like a little indentation, that's called a curb cut, and this was originally sort of pioneered to help people who are using mobility aids like walkers and wheelchairs be able to go across streets easier. Because if there's just a hard curb, that's going to be a pain to get a wheelchair or a stroller up. There's this phenomenon called the curb cut effect, where by making something dramatically more accessible and bridging a gap of access for one group of needs, you actually help everybody. The curb cut wasn't invented for delivery drivers carrying dollies, but it sure helps them. In games, where we're at is sort of at the spark point where enough of the industry has developed a vocabulary about what needs-based game design is. And that's fantastic for accessibility because the needs-based approach is the best way to solve it. That's in contrast to like a disability first approach, saying we're going to solve the game for blindness. Like blindness is a spectrum. But if you solve it for needs-based, you can get really fine-grained. So we're at the point where I think the industry has matured the vocabulary and the interest around it. And we're sort of seeing a renaissance of new accessibility topics and ideas, not just in terms of what features are applied to games, but how games can be designed from the ground up to be more accessible. I think it's probably the most exciting time in my life that I've ever seen in terms of accessibility transforming an industry.
Yeah, and Arman, thank you for the shout out. Arman's also doing amazing work, and I'm super happy to be here with him. And we are really complementary in terms of how we're ultimately promoting all this. I'll talk a little bit about what accessibility looks like functionally in games for players. And so, I mentioned earlier we have adaptive gaming specialists, and their job is to serve right now about 250 to 300 gamers a year that call us and say, "This is my disability. This is my console. This is the game I want to play." And the reason their job is so cool is because they have to play on all the consoles, they have to play with all the controllers, and they have to play all of the games. And so, what does that mean from an accessibility standpoint? That means somebody that can't hold a traditional controller. So, like for example, I've got this 8-bit dude here, right? This is still a more traditional, like you hold this controller overall. But if you can't hold a controller, what does that look like? Well, that looks like a set of buttons then that are set up for somebody whose hands might be in a different place. Those buttons can range in size. They can range in function. It can be an arm that you can use the side of your head to press that button. This 8-bit do is really cool because we recommend this for people that have issues in terms of arthritis or holding a controller and their hands, they just can't play for more than 45 minutes. These are really hypersensitive buttons. It's really easy to play, and it's really easy to not kind of flare up or trigger anything that may occur as it relates to that type of controller. And then you go all the way down the spectrum of where that reaches to. One of the far ends of that is, the Tobii eye tracker. So the Tobii eye tracking device is an eye tracking device that as you're looking around your screen, it's using your camera to track where your eyes are going. And there are buttons in each of the corners of your screen. And if you look and then blink in those corners, it activates those buttons. And so that's a way for somebody to be able to choose those without ever being able to touch. They're also able to use potentially a quad stick, which is it's the controller that you use in your mouth. And so you're using a combination of biting and turning your head and holding the controller in your mouth, breathing. All of those are how you activate the various buttons on those controllers. And so for us, if we serve 250 gamers in a year, 180 of those game design or those individual accessibility control options are unique to those individual players. They're one-handed joysticks, they're accessibility controller for Microsoft, there's one for PlayStation, it's different on Steam and for computers. The Xbox accessibility controller can work for both. But it's one of those amazing options where there's a lot of different ways to tap into those games. And then there are a lot of different modes to make those work, right? So it's not just then how do I give my input into the game, but then how does either the game communicate with me or receive those inputs? And so an example that we love to use is for blind players and the two-dimensional fighting game. So Mortal Kombat is a great example where the NetherRealm developers, they were the ones who worked on the game. You're probably familiar with the game. It's an Atari-based game. But all the functions in the game have their own unique sounds. And so we have a very close friend of ours, and there's several blind players that are very good at Mortal Kombat, and they can beat everybody on our team's butts really bad. But and everyone's like, well, how do they do this? Well, there's a sound that operates in the background. It's a tapping sound. And I've played Mortal Kombat hundreds of times in my life, and I've never heard the tapping sound. But now that I've heard it, I can't unhear it. And so the tapping sound taps faster when the two characters are closer together. And when they're farther apart, it taps slower. As you get closer to the end of the screen, there's like this ominous background music that happens. And so you're getting close to the end of the screen. And so just by those orientations, you can tell where you're on the screen if you can't see it. And then every single action for every single character within the game has its own unique sound. And so what that means is that as you learn those things, you can learn all of those of how that works. The FPS, and I don't know how game oriented we are here in terms of our attendees, but FPS is frames per second. So it's very eye oriented in terms of what you're looking at. It's how quickly the game turns over within the screen. You can then use the audio cues to essentially understand what the FPS tracking is, what the timing is of as you're playing the game, and how you need to orient that and to be able to play that game. So in addition to that, then let's say you have sight, but you don't have sound. There are all kinds of other amazing displays that can happen. You can get lights that go around your computer that show you. Fortnite is another good example where if there's somebody around you, there's a sound tracking system and you can actually add that radar to your screen. And so even if you have the sound off, you can have some sense of the social cues, or sorry, the audio cues of what's happening around you. So there are so many different ways that accessibility looks like in games, and they're all unique. I think Arman, when it talks about a need-based approach, is exactly where we need to be. And this idea of more of a fundamental universal design in these functions of how are we saying, okay, if somebody doesn't have access from a sight perspective, where does our game meet what that might look like? If they can't hear, what does that look like? If they can't move as quickly, what does that look like? And so we hope to try and make sure that game developers are thinking about that at every step of the process as they're making games.
This is Rolando speaking. I think you touched on a couple of things that are very interesting. First, that how incorporating accessibility benefits everyone, and that the bigger and the broader gaming community. And Armand, you mentioned something about the shift and how accessibility is taking a forefront. And I think that's also can be seen in other parts of the gaming ecosystem when you now see reviewers like popular reviewers that are considering or talking about the accessibility features of the game, and the accessibility is considered part of the review of the game. So I think that's a good thing that kind of highlights like a good shift in the industry. Of course, a lot needs to be done because, as Jordan mentioned, is a lot of moving parts. It's like the inputs and then what happens on the other side when I use this different devices or this input methods. So you both kind of mentioned this earlier, that AbleGamers and Good Trouble Games work in different parts of the gaming world, right? How do your roles differ, and where do you see your work overlapping when it comes to accessibility?
Ooh, that's a
Yeah, do you want to go first, Armand?
yeah, sure. It's such a big question, and I have an immediate also, just if it's helpful, this is Armand speaking. I have a few immediate ideas, but I'm curious to hear Jordan's take on this. I think that I think that this really represents sort of the best case scenario of where the nonprofit sector and the for-profit sector kind of intersect. And I think it's because we have inherently different backgrounds, and we're both trying to ultimately solve the same thing in the world, but with different ways. And I'll give an example of how it's different and complementary. To change an industry, to really open up an industry to new perspectives is incredibly hard. And where we're at now is in large part because of the work Jordan's organization has done over the last 20, 25 years. And it's not a monolithic push. There's of course other innovations, like Nintendo was building some of the first adaptive controllers in the 80s, and Xbox has the Xbox adaptive controller, and Windows has been pioneering accessibility for decades as well. But it really takes these big, coordinated, consistent efforts, and Jordan's organization has been in many ways a mainstay in not just putting that effort forward, but trying to develop the language to even talk about this. In my first answer, I specifically pinpointed that the industry now has the vocabulary, and that was really specific word choice. Because when something is easy to talk about, it's easy to share, it's easy to connect with, and it's easy to empathize with. And because of that work, creating the examples and the stories that are really easy and memorable to share with a colleague or a friend, everyone has started sort of realizing that if they themselves don't live with a disability, they know someone who does. And that's just the reality of the world. And this industry exists in the world. So I think that's really where we complement, is that we both amplify that message, and we're a huge beneficiary of the work that Jordan's organization has done over the years, as is the rest of the industry. I think that where we have our own unique specializations, one contrast I'll share is Good Trouble largely does not do like one-on-one assistance for individual gamers, but we really focus on building technology. So some of the barriers around accessibility is the tools or the methods have not yet been pioneered to solve some of the most challenging accessibility questions. And our team at Good Trouble is really, really good at developing technology, building, AI applications, designing machine learning architectures, and that's really where we shine. I see this as a complement in that by supporting the movement from these two different areas, we hope that there's going to be this acceleration for people who receive the benefits and the joy of life that accessibility, especially in games, can bring. But yeah, I'm curious, Jordan, what you think the take is of where we overlap and where we have our own areas.
Yeah, well, and Armin's talked a little bit about what Good Trouble does, but I think he's undersold it a bit. And I think this is one of the best areas of the distinction, which is that their organization has created the ability for individual gamers to now rate games on a scale of their accessibility. And that is something that AbleGamers never had a capability of doing. We've seen a very large shift historically over the last 20 years since when AbleGamers started. To initially, there was some accessible tech out there, but it really grew, and then it became its own market. We see companies that run exclusively building controllers now, right? They build a lot of accessible controllers. There are a lot of answers in the marketplace of experts that know how to build accessible controllers. When AbleGamers started doing that, there were very few of those players. There was great work being done, but they didn't have a market. They didn't have reach. The Xbox Access Controller, the PlayStation Access Controller, those things didn't exist. Now we have this large scale market where one can go and buy this equipment. Now it is expensive. It's prohibitively expensive, which is why we do what we do. But the market exists and people are making it, and it's an emphasis of what we're doing. So then there was this shift to saying, okay, then how do we ensure that games are more accessible as we're building them? And Rolando, you talked about this a little bit. They're complex. They're challenging in terms of how they're built and how they operate. And what I would say in that regard is that in the same way Arman did, they're monolithic in a way that's really hard to move. But what we are now seeing is that all these organizations are hiring consultants. They're hiring teams internally to run accessibility. They're thinking about accessibility and what it means and how to operate it. And so our training at APX, which is important and has trained a lot of people, is almost kind of becoming secondary in the sense that the market has, in a way, solved for itself. That Microsoft has said, we have to be committed to this on our own. ESA, which is the Electronic Sports Association, not sports. What is the S in ESA?
Entertainment Software Association.
Entertainment Software Association has worked on creating gamer tags for all of the games. I've got EA on the mind because we got a FC tournament coming up. They've created tags to say every game that's purchased in the shop, what accessibility features are part of those games so people know about them in the first place. This is front of mind for all of these businesses now in terms of what they're doing. And so we love to see that, and we love to see the encouragement and the intentionality, like the comment said here, about what is happening from the industry perspective. So then where does that leave AbleGamer spot? We view this very much as we've got Arman and the industry working on making sure the games are designed to be more accessible. Every game that is new, a game that is old is always more difficult to make accessible than a game that is new. When you build the door, like we kind of say, like when you build a room and it has a door and windows, then you can add things to the room because you can come in and out. Some of these games in their infrastructure are so old that they were built with very small windows and very small doors to come into from an accessibility standpoint. And so now those doors are getting bigger from when they started. We've done construction to improve the size of them. I'm going to let the analogy go now. But where AbleGamers comes into this now is building this community around the players with disabilities to be part of what they're doing. So when we talk about what that means, and we think about a world that has 8 billion people, let's say half of the world plays video games, and a quarter of those people then have some kind of disability. We're talking about 800 million to a billion gamers at any given moment that could be looking to access or be playing games. That is a massive market that we want to ensure that the industry and that the players that Arman is working with to make sure that the games have these accessibility functions built within them know that this is a market that you need to be targeting to. Now, one, there are all these benefits we've already talked about that go beyond the disability space, but it is not a space to be ignored. That there are a lot of people with disabilities. They love to game, they love to be part of a community. In a lot of cases, a big part of AbleGamers' mission is combating social isolation. And for people with disabilities, that is a huge barrier for them. Gaming can create this space and this ability for them to come together, to be part of a community, to do that online and in a way that a lot of people wouldn't expect. So the Marvelous Life of Ebeline, it's a movie, Ibelin. It's a movie on Netflix. I would highly encourage folks to watch that. It's about an individual that had Duchenne's disease. It's a form of muscular dystrophy, and his like he was just always playing video games, and his family, it wasn't that they were ignoring him, it's what he wanted to do. And so he was playing video games. They didn't know what was going on in those video games, and he had entered this whole other world. I won't kind of spoil the rest of the movie. It's really good. It's on Netflix. It's an amazing watch, but it shows how video game accessibility can, and community around that, can open this door into a place and a space where people feel valued. They feel part of that community. They feel the same as everybody else. And we live in such an ableist and non-disabled focused world sometimes that those can be left out of that process. And so that's the place where AbleGamers is really looking to plant our flag now, of saying, where can we be highlighting and focusing and building that pipeline of players with disabilities and a community of people with disabilities that are coming together, and that we are a market, and we are not to be ignored in this process.
This is Ronald speaking. That's great. And I think it's a perfect segue to our next question and it's about the community. How do you bring in the community of disabled players into what you're doing? And can you share any example of something that has changed because of their input?
Jordan, you want to take this one first?
Sure.
Yeah.
So, as we're building this community, I'll plug something that we're working on. And I know there are a lot of teachers or folks that are connected here to people with disabilities. We're running a tournament on March 7th. It's called the Inclusive International Invitational, is our effort to try and get adapted esports into the Paralympics. And what we are trying to do is, again, create this high profile space and this willingness for people to recognize what we're doing. We're looking for players. It's free to sign up. I'll make sure that I drop the link here in the chat before I leave, so people can have anybody that they know with a disability sign up. But that's what we're doing. We're trying to bring people together. We're trying to highlight some of the high level gamers. We're trying to highlight the fact that people can play for their country, that we have some people playing in this that wouldn't otherwise play in tournaments, but they feel proud of representing their country. We've already got 7 countries represented in who we're playing. For folks that know others, we'd love to see more. This is kind of our effort and start of what that looks like. But a good example to answer how we're always changing the outputs or the inputs of whatever we're doing, and however you look at it, it can be unique. We have run specific classifications of our divisions. One division is that you just have to use some kind of adaptive technology. One is open for anybody with a disability. And then one is blind and low vision. And typically in blind and low vision sports, in para sports, you have to wear a blindfold. That's just typical process because there is a spectrum, like you mentioned, Rolando, of what that looks like from a disability perspective. And so that it just accounts for balance across the board. Well, we've had a few blind and low vision players reach out to us and say, well, I want to be in the blind and low vision division, but I can't use my right eye, but I use a eye tracking and assistive device as I'm playing because I'm blind and low vision. So I can't wear a blindfold or I can't play. So we've had to adjust our classifications, and we've had to adjust how we're going to allow players like that to be part of what we're doing and what that looks like. I think my favorite part about working in the disability rights space is that it is a space where everybody, as they come together, has a place, and there's all this willingness to adjust to how we bring them in, whether that is through sign language, whether that is through closed captions, whether that's through personal descriptions, whatever those might be in the process of all those. Everybody's always willing to try and identify ways to open those doors to allow more people to come into the community. They've often experienced it themselves, or they have a family member that's experienced it. And so we're constantly asking and hearing feedback from our community, and for better or for worse, constantly adjusting what we have to do because of it.
I think it's such a testament to, I think, what's needed. This is Arman speaking, by the way, because events and spaces, I think, are sort of the cornerstones of community, and really elevating, adaptive esports to that level is, for many people, it's not just the celebration of culture and art, but it's really dignifying to a skill and a very, very serious form of competition. So I'm super excited to see that come to life. And I think that there's so much like interesting intersection between what we do, Jordan. On Good Trouble side, um, we've been working for about a year and a half, with some pretty incredible organizations, specifically hospitals, clinics, and OTs, occupational therapists. Um, it sort of, I guess, grounded in my own experience in the hospital using games sort of as care during chemo. We have built these partnerships with different hospitals, pediatric hospitals specifically, to help their staff, the child life specialists, the occupational therapists, the doctors, provide games as care that are accessibility appropriate and age appropriate to patients. And that's been a really rewarding sort of aspect of our work. I'll give a couple really specific examples. There's one hospital, the Children's Hospital of Colorado, um, and they're incredible pioneers of games as care, especially adaptive games. And we were working with them really, really early on, even just to understand how does getting games into hospitals, like that's such an interesting, complex problem. Getting anything into a hospital is a complex problem, but what about games? There's so many considerations. And what if the nurses aren't gamers themselves? Do they even know how to set it up? A lot of this also has intersection with the training materials that Jordan's organization has created in terms of helping people understand even how to interface with some of these topics. Um, in Canada, there's a large organization called the Neil Squire Society, and they have a sub program called Makers Making Change. So I want to just share them really quickly on the topic of community here, and things that we're doing with the help of gamers with disabilities and people with disabilities that we couldn't otherwise do. Makers Making Change is an incredible organization in that they address one of the things that Jordan shared was prohibitive about some of these really nice mainstream brand name adaptive controllers. They empower people with 3D printers to make controllers as part of a file package called the Game Kit. And it basically says, here's where to order the electronics, the components, the hardware, and here's the file to print these different controllers that they design and test. So it can not only bring the cost way down, but because they're modular, you can sort of design what works for you and then be able to get a controller, closer to at cost. They don't charge anything for this. They have these game checkpoint centers across Canada in every province. And what these are sort of rehabilitative plus just open community space type of gaming areas, usually attached to a healthcare facility. And it's where people with a variety of different accessibility needs can show up, and just jump into gaming with no experience needed, with the help of a staff member. So they can teach you, maybe you have something with your tendons that is limiting, or maybe you have a limb difference, or maybe you have a variety of different needs and you've been worried about not being able to play games, but you're curious. It's sort of like the best entry point because they'll help you get set up. But it's in regions where you might not be able to travel to a big city, but there's one of these centers. We've been partnering with them to provide Able to Play, to help the staff sort of work with the people that are coming to the centers to discuss their needs, discover what games that would work for them, and then help them get set up with those games in person. And that's just been incredible in terms of hearing feedback on how to not just make that service better, but different ways to analyze games for different needs. Because accessibility is a moving target. It's never done. It can never be 100% taxonomized or described or solved for, because it's an evolving study. And through those partnerships, we've heard from tens of thousands of gamers how they have needs that are findable within games, but difficult or nuanced to describe. And empowering them sort of at that scale has been just incredible for the team. One other small shout out is, or not small shout out, but an additional shout out. I don't want to monopolize the time here. Jordan mentioned, there's a lot of these consultants and the expertise around accessibility. And one thing that was really important for us when we were building everything we build, Able to Play, as well as the behind the scenes stuff that we provide to like large AAA gaming companies, is making sure that our products and tools themselves are accessible. So we work with incredible consultants who have a variety of different needs. Our team is majority disabled. We have a wide range of representation across, vision, mobility, and auditory, and cognitive disabilities across the whole team. And it's really about, in terms of community, it's not approaching accessibility from this monolithic standpoint where you say, oh, we have good color contrast, check, accessibility is done. You can use everything Good Trouble builds with a screen reader, JAWS, with NVDA. You can use it with an eye tracker. It's only possible because of the experts that we've worked with and the community that we've worked with. So yeah, it's incredible to see how the community comes together.
Thanks, Arman. Thanks, Jordan. And I think you kind of highlighted the importance of not only working to create more accessible products, but also emulating these practices that we are trying to get others to adopt. And that's something we do with our students, with our faculty. Whenever we're like hosting an event, we're calling, it's like we're doing these things to kind of emulate the skills that we want you to acquire. And I think what you both mentioned kind of like perfectly intersects with a couple of questions that we've been getting in the chat. And I want to address the first one. Arman, you mentioned this case where a hospital is integrating gaming, and we can see elements of gaming and the gaming industry and games permeating into other industries such as education, healthcare, etc. So there's a question in the chat: is like, would making games accessible count as play-based learning, game-based learning, or gamification? As that is something that I'm really passionate about.
I think this is a great question. This is Arman. So gamification and game-based learning can in many ways borrow some of the best practices about just making high quality games that are easy to get into. And here's a great example. Have you ever just jumped into a game, you play the first, 30 minutes, and it just feels really good. You understand how to play it, but you've never played it before? That game taught you how to play. There was some tutorialization. There was some unpacking of the mechanics in that initial 30 minutes. When you look at, let's take Duolingo as a great example. They're not a game, but they're very gamified. Their product team studied games and game tutorials to design their pedagogy. And when you think about the most easy to play, easy to get into games, they're really a great exercise in gamified learning. Because when learning feels more like play and it feels more like self-expression, it's something that engages more of your brain. It literally helps neuroplasticity, but it also helps motivation. And when those two things come together, it's incredibly powerful for learning new skills. So if you have a curiosity around gamified learning or just gamification in general for building applications or products that are really enjoyable to use or potentially habit forming, please don't build apps with bad habits, but can help people get into the swing of regularly using something like a journal or a mental health app. Looking at how games and game tutorials unpack new concepts is a fantastic starting point, because within that you have to question, how does someone get information out of your app? There's cognitive accessibility elements there. There's visual accessibility elements there. There's auditory and mobility elements there. And when you think about the different needs, how might someone use your product if they're low vision, if they're blind? What if there's an audio component that is a voiceover that you invested all this effort in getting right? Well, if they can't hear, make sure you're providing fantastic, engaging captions. Make sure that there's even, one of the Forza games had an incredible ASL and BSL interpretation. Shout out to Jennifer providing ASL for this event. Thank you so much. Like, think about how people can get information, because that's the first point of what they do with it in the act of learning. And then look to games and tutorials and how learning can feel more like an engaged exercise than a study and test type of methodology.
I'll add a different perspective and a quick answer to this, which is that one of the things that AbleGamers is looking at is trying to develop, well, we don't really know what we're going to call them yet, but it's a conceptual game guide for somebody that may have some kind of developmental disability but still wants to play a game that's too complex for them to play at its onset. And the idea is that you start with lower tiers of games that will train you in the skills that you ultimately need to then be able to build up and play some other final game. So setting a standard of like, you have to finish X, Y, and Z things in Minecraft first. You have to play then this game to understand how like a flow of this game is going to mirror, and then getting into another game. So our answer is kind of, we can use games at different levels to teach other people how to get better at more complex games. And that's something that I think that one of the underserved areas, having done a lot of work with the Down syndrome community, I think one of the underserved areas in gaming is to individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities at some level that we'd love to see engaged with more.
This is Rolando speaking, and that's great because what your responses kind of answer another question about using games to fight different ableism or help people learn more about disability or fight ableism. And we have time for just one more question. I think this one is very interesting and a good way to close us out. What are some of the commonly overlooked aspects of game development that indie game devs should remember to ensure they reach as much as of an audience as possible? Any tips for indie devs trying to make their games as accessible as possible?
Ooh, Jordan, you want to jump into this first?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that we would recommend is taking a look at our APX training and the 22 patterns that we recognize, right? And that is pre-building in then all of your screen readers, your color contrasts, like all the different functions and all the different patterns that will lead to some form of accessibility. We'd encourage you to review them. And the answer to that is not put all those things into your game right away, because some of those things might not need to be in your game. What we see is that individuals will take actually a deck. Do I have? Yeah, a deck of the cards of each one of the patterns. So I have these here. You can get these on our site. And if someone is looking for a copy of these, I can get you one. But it's essentially each one of the patterns are represented on a card. And so what we'll see often for some developer groups is that they will take the cards and they'll lay them out on the table in front of them as they're working or talking through different solutions and problems. And that allows them to think about where those accessibility points are and where the ones that are going to be the most challenging for your game. So if you are a game that requires some kind of orientation to like point and shoot or point or get to a specific spot, having something that allows people to slow that mode down is going to be important. Now, we talked a little bit about this earlier. It's not about building that function from the get-go. It's about making sure that you leave the door open to what that looks like. Arman knows much more about how to do that specifically. I know that there's a lot of great tools out there that exist on GitHub and others for indie developers that are developing these. But using the patterns and thinking about what that process looks like at the onset and saying, okay, I really want to use a lot of colors, so I have to make sure my contrast is good. Or we're going to play a game that's set during the nighttime, so I have to make sure that our text isn't gray so somebody can read it, right? Things like that, as you're thinking about those individually, will allow you to pick and choose the accessibility tools that you really need.
Just to very quickly build on that, there's a few like high level things that every indie should plan for. If you have it, learn how it implements how to remap your controls, because that's going to open up millions of adaptive controllers. Make sure that any dialogue has subtitles. Make sure those subtitles have a background. I want to just put a shout out in the chat here to the Accessible Games Initiative, or accessiblegames.com. They have a 25 features that they've really described in depth and provided detailed implementation guides for, which could also be a really helpful starting point. But I agree with Jordan. Consider it really early, and also consider what's true to the soul of your game. Plan for it early, plan for what fits your game, and don't treat it like a checklist.
Thank you, Arman. Thank you, Jordan. And we'll be happy to share all these links, as well as Jordan, if you can get us the link of the cards that you mentioned.
Oh, yeah.
You can send it to participants or share in the chat. We want to appreciate your time, your expertise. I think we needed more time to kind of like talk about these many aspects of accessibility gaming, but probably that's a good sign that we need to bring you back for another event. So thank you much for your time. To everyone on the audience, thank you for sticking with us. Our next session will be at 2:15 p.m. Eastern, where we'll have Caroline Desrosiers talking about image descriptions and teaching us how to do those more effectively. So thank you very much, and see you in a bit.